the wonderful adornments of the leaders of the world. Thus I have heard. At one time the Buddha was in the land of Magadha, in a state of purity, at the sight of enlightenment, having just realized true awareness. The ground was solid and firm, made of diamond, adorned with exquisite jewel discs and myriad precious flowers. With pure, clear crystals, the ocean of characteristics of the various colors appeared over an infinite extent. There were banners of precious stones, constantly emitting shining light and producing beautiful sounds. Nets of myriad gems and garlands of exquisitely scented flowers hung all around. The finest jewels appeared spontaneously, raining inexhaustible quantities of gems and beautiful flowers all over the earth. There were rows of jeweled trees, their branches and foliage lustrous and luxuriant. By the Buddha's spiritual power, he caused all the adornments of this enlightenment sight to be reflected therein. Where are the human beings? There are no humans mentioned in here, just material things, and the Buddha himself. But there's one other person, I. Thus I've heard, we know in the sutras that contain the oral teachings of the Buddha, that this specific person, I, is Ananda. So Ananda is Buddha's little cousin, and he had a photographic memory and also a memory able to remember all of Buddha's teachings. He actually heard the Buddha himself either through crossing temporal space and time and was present at this assembly to hear the Buddha, or to hear the Buddha tell it later. He heard it, and that's why then when the sutras were later compiled after the Buddha's death, then Ananda related what the Buddha had said orally, and they were put in writing. This is in the faith section. In this paragraph, to conclude with, by the Buddha's spiritual power, he caused all the adornments of the enlightenment sight to be reflected therein. Interesting that the Buddha's spiritual power is what caused all of this to happen. And boy, that requires a tremendous amount of faith, I would think. So for anybody to have even past paragraph and wish to continue to go on reading, I think it says something about the reader or the listener who is able to accept this. And that's why this particular text is very much Mahayana, requires faith in the Buddha and in this particular section too. Thus I've heard itself requires already believing that Ananda was someone who heard the oral teachings and someone who's relating them accurately enough. And thus I've heard also usually conveys historical setting there and the historical timing. Thus I've heard itself a phrase, a Mahayana Buddhist text, that it all begins with this phrase, because it was a way to prove to faithgoers that the texts are true and as told by the Buddha. And so this was the validation. Thus I've heard, Ananda says. We could take that to a different level even. My interpretation is that what is it that heard is this I. And so all of us could be Ananda, and all of us are Ananda at this point as we hear the teachings now. And so it says something about our connection with the Buddhist disciples, being that we are Buddhist disciples now. What is it that we hear? So thus I've heard. In Chinese, 如是我闻, it could also be thus, or such as is, or the way things are, the way it is now, the way it is. I have heard that. I have heard the way things when we hear the way things actually are, the way it is, then we've actually really heard our Buddha nature. And that's what Ananda is really hearing as he hears the Buddha's teachings. And then the verb heard here can be a very specific practice. There's a lot more to be said about that, but other than that, hearing this sutra, it could also be an encounter with the sutra and with the teachings here. Every time a sutra begins, we get this phrase, and this phrase itself allows us to really be in Ananda's shoes and to know who is it that is hearing. What is it that we actually have heard? And then also grapple with the process of this encounter. You're happy to hear about the Buddha's enlightenment. Do you believe it? Why all this focus on beautiful material things? Crystals and jewels and ground, nets. All of these things are tangible material things. I thought when I listened to the Buddhist teachings, he would be talking about our mind or, the essence of us. Why this focus on external form? After Mara came to test him and then he became enlightened, what he did was that he touched the ground. What does that mean? The earth may be his witness, but he's really taking refuge in his own inherent nature. But being grounded and realizing that the enlightenment is nothing farther away than our very much daily material existence. That it's not separate from that. That's why when you go to work and when you talk to you, the Dharma is very much alive in that. It's not something that's cut off and that's something that's completely separate. It's a delusion, but once you're enlightened like the Buddha, you come back and see the samsara, then it's with complete clarity and it's no longer deluded. But samsara, he's very much in existence in samsara and works through samsara. Or also for us to reach this state or to reach wisdom in general is that we still need to go through material existence. And specifically, we're talking about our senses. Our sense faculties are our vision, our smells, our ability to taste, to hear, and to feel things, and to think. We still need to go through the very material existence of our physical body, of our senses, in order to realize enlightenment. We can't reach enlightenment, we can't reach wisdom without our physical senses. The description here requires us to use our physical senses and bring them to the highest level. So the visual here, these images of the most exquisite things, the highest forms of the visuals, and the sounds, the most beautiful sounds, the highest form of those sounds, feeling luxuriant, the touches. So all of these are about our senses, but in our typical way of what we imagine to be the best, the highest level of what our senses are capable of wanting or reaching. The first paragraph begins here with all of this external form. It requires our senses to be used, and our senses lead us to the Buddha's enlightenment. Also, is this the Buddha heaven? The Buddhist heaven? Is this where we go after death? And how is that different than the Christian heaven? Isn't the Christian heaven full of kind of happy people? It's always talking about how happy you will be when you get to heaven. So how come the Buddha's heaven is just full of beautiful things? Where are the happy people? I don't know that I have an answer, but my next response was, why am I so egocentric to think that humans come first? why do I think that I come first? And then that perhaps it says something about, not to put Christianity down, but the Christian way of thinking about heaven, that it's very much human focused, right? Everything else is serving human beings, including eating animals. But in the Buddhist sense, the cosmology is greater than that. It's way beyond human beings. And like you said, it talks about how non-human beings are in the audience. Actually, in his audience right now, those who are able to hear the Buddha give this lecture immediately after enlightenment are the great bodhisattvas, the great awakened beings who are awakening themselves and awakening others, only those who can hear the Buddha teaching at this time. There are other beings around, and there are also other human beings, but they can't hear this lecture because they have a different intention. They're only interested in their personal salvation. This is how Buddhism, the way that it's described in the sutra, is very different. It's not about you. It's not about me. You're not in here. I'm not in here. Right? It's greater than that. Okay, so after using our senses and then describing all of these beautiful sounds, beautiful images, and amazing things to touch, to smell, and then to this line, this final line, that kind of brings it all back to, okay, but you know what? All these are just reflections. The Buddha's supernatural powers, when we believe them and believing that these are causes of Buddha's magic, then they're not real. So here it describes these amazing things and maybe possibly, heaven on earth, heaven after death, what have you, but they're merely illusory. They are merely reflections, reflected in the Buddha's power. So the Buddha shows us with all his magic the most amazing things most human beings might want, might be interested in, and say, well, hey, this is just mirage that I created with my net. Kind of throws a loop at you. Just within this one paragraph, there's a koan.